America and the gateway to the West. Good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Noory. This is Coast to Coast AM. Special Coast hello to avid Coast to Coast listeners, Glenn and Liz from O'Fallon, Missouri. Thank you for listening all these years. Later tonight, UFOs and angels and ETs. Here's what's happening. Health officials in Massachusetts are warning that more than 134,000 people may have had their personal and medical information stolen as part of a worldwide data security incident involving the file transfer program called MoveIt. The Executive Office of Health and Human Services said that this stealing is widespread. Students across the United States have been chronically absent in record high numbers after the COVID-19 pandemic. A new study from Stanford University shows more than 25% of the students were classified as chronically absent in the 21-22 school year because they had missed at least 10% of the school year. Before the pandemic, only 15% of the students had high levels of absenteeism, according to the study. Howard Bloom, the author of The Genius of the Beast, is with us. Howard, I guess COVID was a little more devastating than a lot of people thought, huh?
And it's very strange. Thomas S.D. is an education professor at Stanford University, and he's just released the results of a study he carried out in partnership with the Associated Press. The study's topic is student absenteeism in 40 states, and the results are disturbing. The study concludes that 6.5 million students are chronic absentees. They are absent more than 1 in 10 days of the school year. What's worse, in 7 states, chronic absenteeism has doubled since the days just before COVID. Over 50% of students are chronic absentees in states like Alaska and New Mexico. Almost 50% are chronically absent in Washington, D.C., and in New York City, where I live, 55% of 12th graders are chronically absent, more than half. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. As you already know, our students are doing miserably compared to our global competitors. For example, on the Northwest Evaluation Association's NWE scale, China's students lead the world with an average test score of 592. Students in the United States, on the other hand, score an abysmal 478, which means our kids are behind China's kids by a whopping 114 points. That's a lag of nearly 24%. Our student test results were bad coming out of the pandemic 2 years ago, but this year they are even worse. Our lag in the global educational competition is serious stuff. It is stuff we normally blame on our schools. After all, our education budget as a percentage of GDP is below the global average, which means our investment in education is less than roughly 80 other nations. But are our schools really to blame for the fact that fewer and fewer kids show up? Maybe not. We pay teachers an average of $66,397 a year. That's much more than the income of the average American worker. We have more teachers per student than China, the world leader in student achievement. China has 23 students for every teacher. We have the luxury of only 15 students per teacher. Our classes are smaller, so our student outcomes should be better, and so should our rates of attendance. If the problem is not our teachers or our schools, what can account for such poor learning and such poor attendance? The answer may lie in a dilemma in Arizona. A year ago, Congress passed the CHIPS Act, part of a Biden policy to bring computer microchip supply chains back from China to the United States. The world's leader in microchip manufacture is Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, better known as TSMC in Taiwan. The Biden administration convinced TSMC to build a $12 billion chip plant in Arizona. There's only one hitch. TSMC can't find enough workers with the skills it takes to build the Arizona factory. Why? The problem is not our poor student outcomes in math and reading. TSMC's Taiwan executives say the obstacle is something radically different. The obstacle is our culture. Americans are too soft and spoiled to provide the sort of work that modern chip making demands. Americans are not willing to work long hours and to show up for duty on an hour's notice. We have developed what some call a therapeutic culture, a coddling culture, a culture in which our failures of will are excused, and we are not told that we have to steel ourselves and keep on going, but instead we're told we have to spill our woes to a mental health worker. And that lack of discipline may be behind more than just one chipmaker's America problem. It may be behind poor school attendance.
Oh, my friend, you did a great job on that report. We'll talk to you next week, Howard. Coast to Coast guest, paranormal expert, and journalist Lee Spiegel has died. He had esophageal cancer. Lee also hosted for years the Edge of Reality broadcast.
I mean, UFOs have been around and reported for tens of thousands of years. Yeah, people have reported these strange, technologically superior objects for a very, very long time. From very early on, when humans first drew or painted images on rock walls, they became the first media reporters of unexplained vehicles in our skies.
Lee Spiegel was a dear friend of this program, and of all of us at Coast to Coast, he will be missed. Lee Spiegel is gone. Federal Reserve officials were divided over the need for more interest rate hikes as the U.S. Central Bank's July 25th, 26th meeting with some participants citing the risks to the economy of pushing rates too far. As most policymakers said, we're going a little too fast. Well, they released the session results today. So let's see what happens with interest rates in the future. With home values remaining strong across the country, Americans are tapping into their home equity to pay for renovations and debts. Average mortgage rates are close to 7% now, with low inventory in most housing markets across the country, and home prices have held firm after surging during the pandemic. Here's investment analyst Mish Sedlock with us. Mish, they're tapping into their home equity. That's not a good thing.
It's not. And just looking here now at Mortgage News Daily, the average rate right now for a new mortgage 30-year loan is 7.34%. Wow, it keeps rising. The reasons that they gave for tapping were remodeling, debt consolidations, and emergencies, but we don't really know what those reasons are. Those are just the reasons they give. But one thing we do know is that applications for credit are being rejected at extremely high rates now at banks. People seeking a credit card limit rise are being rejected at a rate of 30.7%. For home refis is 20.8%. For auto loans is 14.2%. That's up from 9% a month ago. So people are likely turning to any equity they have in their house to be able to pay bills. Some interesting things going on here yesterday. George, we had a retail sales report yesterday showing sales were up 0.7%, but auto sales declined 0.3%. Today, we had an industrial production report from the Fed that said production of autos was up over 5%. So sales down, production up. What's going on there? I think what's happening is the auto manufacturers, George, are gearing up for a strike next month.
Oh, boy.
The big three auto manufacturers are all in this. The United Auto Workers, listen to these demands, George. They want a 46% raise over 4 years. They want to reduce the work week from 40 hours to 32 hours. They want a right to strike over plant closures. They want increased retiree benefits. They want defined benefit pension plans, and they want cost of living adjustments. George, that's not going to happen. But I think the big story coming up next month is a very dangerous, devastating strike because these sides are really very, very far apart, George.
That's investment analyst Mish Sedlock. His website, of course, is mishtalk, mishtalk.com. In a moment, financial astrologer William Stickevers joins us to talk about the future, our future, next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Noory with you with a broad scope of political, economic, psychological, spiritual, metaphysical knowledge. William Stickevers explores possibilities about the future and how they can emerge from the present by weaving current secular trends, geopolitical factors, and what they call mundane astrological portents. A counseling astrologer since 1988, William is well-versed in psychological, horary, electional, medieval, and Renaissance branches of astrology, that's all of them, certified in astrocartography, and worked with the Alfie Lavoie of Astrological Institute of Research. William, welcome back, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing great, George. Thanks for having me on the show again. And as usual, I've been really, really busy with geopolitical and macro forecast and webinars. So, things are really crazy this year, and this summer, no doubt, has been going into overdrive.
What made you decide to blend astrology with some of these world events?
Actually, back in 2008, because I was seeing something that was very different with my clients. I was living in Manhattan along Wall Street at that time, and I had many people in the hedge fund and finance industry that were very distressed, and yet everything on the news was hunky-dory, happy days are here again, and people were flipping homes, taxi cab drivers were making a fortune, right? So if you remember that was August of 2008. Everything was great, George, and then kaboom. And the alignments, the astrological alignments, proved that out very, very clearly. And then I decided it's time to roll up my sleeves and really master macro geopolitical and macroeconomic forecasting, which has really been part of the astrological tradition for over 500 years.
Lots to talk with you about tonight, William. In just several days, on August 22nd, the nations of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa are going to get together to consider using gold as their new currency, and they're going to come up with a new currency to try to beat the dollar down. What's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big geopolitical event because it's really a shift away from the U.S. dollar. And what a lot of people don't realize is that the U.S. dollar is used worldwide as a means of trade settlement, meaning they have to swap their currency. If you have two countries trading with each other outside of the United States, they have to swap their currency for U.S. dollars in order for that trade settlement to be commenced. Well, now you see a new rivaling system, and this new BRIC, they're going to call it a BRIC, right?
Yep.
And it's going to be defined in terms of a specific weight of gold, but it won't be redeemable for gold. Instead, the gold will act as a reference point, allowing the BRIC nations to piggyback on the existing dollar-gold system without having to actively manage or defend a fixed exchange rate. So this is a big, big event. It's going to happen back in Johannesburg, and we're going to see a lot of strategic positioning taking place and a game of geopolitical chess, and we're going to see this expand out. I'm foreseeing now 20 countries joining these five nations, and this will be a means where they can trade and not be using the U.S. dollar for a means of trade settlement, and that is going to lower U.S. dollar reserves. U.S. dollar reserves are like 85% of the global population, right? Global population was holding U.S. dollar reserves. It's now plummeted down to 58%. So that means less countries, less banks, less central banks will be holding reserves. So this is a big, big titanic shift.
In your opinion, is it going to happen?
Oh, yes. You'll hear a series of announcements. The mainstream political media will play it down and say, the dollar's still a world reserve currency. There's no threat here. But you have to remember, George, if you look at the population of Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, you realize that they're over 50% of the population. They've got, combined together, they outnumber us in nuclear weapons. They outnumber us in total CPI. In other words, their economies combined supersedes the United States, right? So together, by themselves, no, but together, and they're working together, and they have one system, and they have a plan, and that plan does not include a world that is dominated in the 21st century by America.
I know just enough about astrology to be dangerous, William. So with Pluto's return and the fourth turning crisis, what does that mean to us?
Yeah, George, we're experiencing that right now. We're seeing, a deficit in American leadership. This is very common. If you just go back 84 years, we had the last fourth turning crisis, and that was the U.S. Neptune return. And what did we see? We saw the near collapse of the U.S. government, the rise of new political leadership because there was a derelict leadership that resulted in the Depression. And we also saw the beginning of World War II, which went full throttle during that period. So we saw depression and war. And if you just go back another 84 years, happens every 84 years. We had the Civil War and the rise of Abraham Lincoln. Just go back another 84 years, you had the American Revolution over taxes, George, you remember?
That's right.
Party,
That's right.
And the rise of George Washington. So we are on the precipice right now of an internal crisis that's both external in terms of an existential threat and internal in terms of a potential civil unrest or a civil insurrection. And this is what is going to play out, particularly as we go into the 2024 election.
I'm seeing all kinds of things happening. I'm in St. Louis right now, and they had a carjacking. They've had several. They had a robbery. And there's a new thing going on now, William, where they ram you with your car, you get out, then they steal your car, and off they go.
Yeah.
I mean, what's happening with people?
Yeah, I mean, that's all very classic. If you remember, back in the 30s during the Fourth Turning Crisis, we saw what? We saw these gangs that became Al Capone, right? A very sophisticated crime syndicate. And we're going to see more of this rise up. And it's obviously going to be very different. And we're going to see where, we're going to just see a lot of major shifts. Now, the other big thing happening with the Pluto return is what they call transiting Pluto is squaring the transiting north node, the lunar node. And what that basically means, it's when that happens, it indicates intense transformations, domestic upheaval and economic structures. And if you just go back, if I'll just list off a few times it happened, if you go back to 1931, that same aspect was when we saw all the banks begin to fail, right?
That's right.
Then we saw in 39. It happened in August of 39. We had the outbreak of World War II. Then if you just skip ahead and you go to, let's just say, 1998, that was the Asian financial crisis. And then 2006, that was the peak of the housing price, and that was the beginning of the subprime mortgage crisis, which then went full throttle. So that was the end of 2006, went full throttle by the time we hit September 2008. So we're there now. And what's the White House doing? They're doing all this stealth liquidity, secret. It's like the shadow banking system, if you will, through government physical intervention, right, while the Fed is applying brakes to the economy because it's overheating and inflation is not going away. That's why they have to keep raising interest rates. The Biden administration is pushing hard on the accelerator, and the reason they're doing this, and it's creating a potential bomb in the credit markets, is to ensure plausible deniability where the media is compliant in order to ensure that they have an economy to run on.
About every 14 years, Jupiter and Uranus get together, and what happens?
Yeah. Now, that is another big thing. That has very much to do with volatility in the markets. We see markets overheat. Jupiter, Uranus is very inflationary. So that keeps saying, oh, no, inflation is contained. It is not contained. And when they are raising interest rates to contain the inflation, that means the economy is overheating and something is wrong. And then when they increase the interest rates, what happens to the markets? Boom. So what we're seeing now is an overheated market. The S&P and 500 is up. NASDAQ is up. It keeps going up. And the yield curve is now warning of a very severe recession between the 10-year and 3-month spread. And it's turned negative to negative 1.46. So, George, when it starts moving towards zero, and that's about a month or two away during the time of the October solar eclipse, that is the moment we have some type of credit event that indicates we are in recession.
Are these things, William, that will be or could be?
These things will be at this point. We cannot reverse it. Now, the question becomes, what will be the response? And right now, I'm seeing the political situation going from bad to worse in terms of the White House and its derelict leadership, regardless of what the partisan position is, right? People are not happy. And we're seeing here a situation just like the Great Depression. Well, I mean, what created the Great Depression, George, was the fact that government didn't respond proactively enough. We're seeing that happen now, and because there's an election, they are going to force the issue of the stealth liquidity while the Fed keeps raising interest rates, and all that stealth liquidity is creating the inflation. So we're seeing a confluence of combinations of things. And look, Biden just said we're not in a recession, in my view. The unemployment rate is still the lowest we had in history. The Federal Reserve just announced that the recession is canceled. They predicted a few months ago we will have a recession. Now, you know why? They're getting pressure.
A lot of pressure, William. We'll come back and chat more with you. William Stickevers with us on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Noory back with astrologer William Stickevers. William, where does China fit in all of this? They're not having a great economic time themselves.
Well, George, I hate to say it, but China's economy is rapidly contracting, facing serious issues that really threaten its stability. And this includes a deflationary environment. I mean, plummeting home prices, missing data on land development, currency reserves missing. So the global implications is there because the situation in China is not isolated. We're seeing similar circumstances could occur in the U.S. It could bleed over. And you have to realize that Chinese real estate market composes over 35% of their economy, unlike the U.S. where it's only 23%. You saw what happened in 2008.
That's right.
Right? When only 23% of the economy went into the dumps, the world went into a financial contagion, near contagion. So the situation now is you now see more than 50% slump in land sales for development last year, and then you see more falling home prices. The major too-big-to-fail developer called Country Garden is already defaulting, and China is withholding the data now. They're saying, well, no, we're not going to tell anybody, so we don't want to feed into the global concerns. And what you're seeing now is Wall Street, the too big to fails on Wall Street, they're pulling their money out of China because they can't get the information. China is hiding because things are much worse, and Chinese authorities have cut the interest rates. And that basically shows historically when you cut interest rates, it signals major economic trouble. And the rate, so nothing has worked that they've done ever since the Evergrande collapse. And, the value of people's stocks, homes, their net worth are all closely tied to economic confidence. So if you get information, hey, things are going to go bad from worse, people are going to start selling everything. And so the unthinkable is now happening where China is going to start taking more drastic and unprecedented steps to prop up its economy while it is deflating. And this is going to cause a global currency shortage, right? Because there's hints now not only of a global dollar shortage, but possibly a shortage of other currencies. And this could be a colossal problem affecting various sectors. So, when you look at what's happening with China and then you look at the American economy, particularly with the regional and small banks, with the imploding the American corporate real estate, right, it indicates we're not immune to such crises. So this shadow banking system has been propping up the Chinese economy since COVID, and since then, right, we're seeing now the shadow banking system is in crisis with the Jupiter-Pluto alignment, right? That connects with shadow banking. We also have shadow banking mechanisms in place that are keeping the regional and small banks up as the development deals, all those different buildings that are empty. Corporate real estate is declining. So we're seeing what's happening with China's banking system. We're seeing liquidity drying up is a major concern. That's going to go from bad to worse. And we're seeing now it affecting the currency reserves and the shortage of money among real estate developers. And we're also going to see that bleed into America because what's happening in China doesn't stay in China. And that's why the U.S. may be facing similar problems, particularly with the property market, the commercial real estate crisis, coupled with banks tightening. Banks are not lending, right? We heard Ms. Shevlock talk about this, and they're not lending. And with the Jupiter-Pluto alignment, and as more inflation kicks in, this could lead to a similar economic wall where we're crashing into that wall.
And all politics aside, how would astrology rate how the administration is handling things these days?
Well, from a historical perspective, I would give it about a 2, maybe 3.
On a 10 scale?
Out of a 10, yeah.
Wow. That's not impressive.
No, I don't believe this administration is sustainable. I think the Biden administration is imploding politically. They know that they cannot run Biden, but they do not want Kamala Harris to stand in and be the Democratic nominee. That would almost ensure a Trump or Republican victory.
I want to talk about Trump later on this hour with you and get your take on all these indictments that keep coming out. But the Federal Reserve has been steadily raising interest rates almost every time they meet. What's your take on the future?
Yeah, I mean, George, the problem is when you keep raising interest rates, it is an 18-month lag. So if you go back 18 months, they started raising interest rates around March of 2022. And they were raising rates while the economy was getting weaker and weaker because of all that COVID money injected into the system and all that stealth liquidity in the system to prop up an economy that needs to go into recession in order to reset itself. And because of that, they raise the rates, and then the impact, the economic impact, happens almost perfectly. If you look at, most economists, there's essential agreement, 18 months. So we're right there, right now, as of August 15th, it's 18 months. And now we're going to see the impact of raising those interest rates, particularly on the small and regional banks, because the corporate real estate can't pay their bills. And these banks, right, are not lending now. And so we're going to see a credit freeze. They're going to keep raising interest rates. They'll probably raise them again. The last time we had interest rates this high was back in 2006, 2007. If you remember what happened with the real estate crisis, right? You had 5.5, 5.75 interest rates, right? Everyone said everything is fine, right? And boom. So it's Michael Burry, right? The film, The Big Short.
Yeah.
He just shorted the market in the billions. He is now expecting another Big Short crisis, and he's putting his money where his mouth is.
In a big way. He could lose it all or get it all back 100 times over.
Correct. He's putting more money in than he did in 2008. He's saying it's that bad in the situation in China, the situation with the commercial real estate, it's all coming to a head. And the Biden administration, right, is keeping plausible deniability and not making proactive measures. They're actually working contrarian to the Fed.
We've had some bank failures of recent days, William. How does that look?
Well, I'm seeing at least another 8 banks going into receivership and being consolidated with the 2 big defaults, or at least one of the 2 big defaults. So right now, the 2 big defaults, 6 or 7 banks, they're okay, but we're talking about hundreds of smaller banks, and the Fed is aware of this. Meanwhile, the world is shifting away from the dollar. You have geopolitical issues. You have the issue in Ukraine. That's not going very well right now for Biden. They're covering – you notice you don't hear too much news, George. There's a reason. The Russians are winning. The Russians are winning. They're reaching their objectives, right? And so we're going to see that play out very, very big. So this is not very good for the dollar. That's the other thing. Everyone thinks that the U.S. dollar is going to continue, that we can continue to be the world reserve currency, extend and pretend, not pay our bills, export all our money out to other nations who are going to take it for trade settlements so we can export our inflation. And this is, George, this all happened during what? That fourth turning period, right?
Yep.
Same thing. Now it's going to be, but now instead of Neptune, we have Pluto.
Oh, boy. What's that mean?
Yeah, well, that means we're talking about a level of intensity that the world has not seen, a crisis we have not seen. We have not seen a crisis like that. We're talking like a 1931 to 39 situation. I mean, look, last time we had Pluto, right, make a square to the node, that was the outbreak of World War II in August of 1939. We have the same alignment that happened just August 3rd. So the things in Ukraine are not going well, and we could see things escalate, maybe not immediately, but you remember World War II took a while before it really got cooking there. So, and then look, the housing, everyone says, oh, housing is great, right? Housing market affordability is 10% below 2006 lows. So affordability index is a measure, right, of that compares the income to home prices and mortgage rates. I mean, things are not going well that way. And look, as the situation with the housing market becomes more uncertain, as interest rates approaching near 8%, they're going to go higher than 8%, 8.5, 8.6, right? Manhattan, for instance, rents are exploding. Landlords are like, screw it, we're going to triple down. We're going to, you know what? Maybe people can't buy a home and banks are not going to lend. It doesn't matter. We're going to make up the difference. So rental costs for a one-bedroom, 600-square-foot apartment in Manhattan is $5,600 a month, which is $67,200 a year. And Brooklyn, it's $52,800 per month. We're talking about a little box.
Crazy times. What about bankruptcies?
Yeah, so we're seeing that happen with the banks. We saw that 5 major banks. That, look, the amount of money lost with those banks in March during the Jupiter-Pluto alignment, and that Jupiter-Pluto alignment is coming again to a theater near you in October, compounded with the Jupiter-Uranus, right? So we saw more money was bailed out in that 4 to 5 week period in March into early April than it was through the entire 2008 and 2009 financial crisis, and they kept it hidden. The mainstream media is not necessarily lying, but they're not coming out with their numbers. You have to do the deep dive like I do and do the research, right? You have to be like Ms. Shevlock. You have to be like one of those people you have on the show to tell the truth. This is the biggest cover-up. Other than the UFO thing, this is the biggest cover-up going on.
Oh, my God. Can we get out of it?
No, George, I think we need to have this recession to reset. I mean, there's just too much debt in the system, and we're having a millennial crisis. So in the book, The Fourth Turning is Here, one of the chapters is about that the hero generation, the millennials, are in a crisis, and they're going to be the ones that get us through this. But right now, the situation is getting dire for them, and they are the largest voting bloc in the United States, and they're going to be the ones that determine the next president of the United States. And right now, both of them are not happy with Biden and Trump, and it just really comes down to age.
Well, since you brought up Trump, and I mentioned him earlier, 4 indictments, horrible trials coming up, bad for the country, bad for him. Where's it going to lead?
Yeah, so it's going to get much more chaotic. I'm seeing another indictment from Arizona coming. It's possible I'm seeing that. So we're going to get much more indictments, but I don't see anything holding him back from successfully.
He's a front runner right now, right? He's the front runner.
He's the front runner, and in fact, I'm seeing his numbers get even stronger. So this is going to present a problem for the deep state. The deep state cannot allow him to be the nominee. So it's going to be very interesting. Right now, I don't see anything stopping him from being the nominee. However, the deep state will strike back, and we'll see what they do because they cannot allow that to happen. Biden must win at all costs in order to implement what they put into place. So, you know, and the problem is Biden, based on what I see in the astrology, is that I don't think he's the nominee. I don't think he physically gets through up to the nomination process. I just do not see that happening.
How about RFK Jr.?
Yeah, I see him really doing well. I think we could see an upset in Iowa and New Hampshire, certainly New Hampshire. I think this could set up a situation where we see with LBJ, who ran in the late 60s, and he lost, I think he lost New Hampshire, and he decided to drop out. So we could see a similar thing, although Biden, you know, LBJ, you know, is really on the ball, right? His health was robust, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
But with Biden, his ability to prosecute a very contentious, very volatile campaign is not possible, and the White House knows it. You know it, George. We all know it. We just don't want to talk about it. But this is going to come out in an explosive way where we're going to have a Baghdad Bob moment, right? Where they're going to say everything is fine, and we're going to have a Baghdad Bob moment where it's going to be really embarrassing. So I do think they are scrambling. You know, the Federal Reserve is scrambling, China's scrambling, Wall Street secretly is scrambling while they tell you your pension is safe, right? And we're going to see here the Democratic Party is scrambling because they know Trump, right, should he get the nomination, and I'm not like saying, you know, we're not making a prediction here. They know he is a formidable campaigner, and he's going to put them into a position they don't want to be. So I think they're seriously looking at a way, how do they swap out, how do they make sure that Kamala Harris is not the nominee, and they find a way to get Biden to step down. And I think we're getting closer to that moment, and I think they don't know what to do. I think if they had a plan, they would begin to implement that, or we would hear certain announcements, pre-announcements.
What is your advice, William, for investors or people who just want a little security? I mean,
yeah, so security. So the problem is inflation. A lot of people, George, they think, oh no, William, what are you talking about? The stock market is up, But you got to take into account what's the real rate of inflation? 4%? No, it's more like averaging 8-10%. I mean, it was like, if you look at shadow stats, it was 16%. It's gone down to 11-12%. So if the stock market, let's say, does 11%, you have to subtract, let's say, 10%, and you only made 1% because the purchasing power. So the thing is that you need to be in non-correlated assets that outperform the inflation hurdle, the real rate of inflation. And so, I mean, gold is generally that thing, except why is gold under 2,000? That because they're suppressing the price. They are suppressing it. They have to. Why? They're going to have to suppress the price more because of what's happening with the BRICs. When they come out with their BRIC CBDC that's connected with gold, and they can do all of this type of trade settlement, they're going to have to suppress the price of gold because the purchasing power, if gold starts taking off more, that means the dollar is going down in a way that they can no longer deny or hide. So I do think gold will go up. I think gold overall is a good, decent thing for people who are not sophisticated. And then the smart money index has been moving a lot of their money into Bitcoin. And if you look at Bitcoin, it was 3,000 in 2020. Now it's 30,000. And my projection is 300,000, around the 300,000 range by 2025 with the next halving event. Starting sometime around where it goes around for 30 to 55,000, and by April, and then moving into that $300,000 range, because you have now BlackRock will get authorization to start buying Bitcoin along with Fidelity, and so Bitcoin will become the new world reserve currency, and the smart money is moving already in it, George.
Well, that scares me. Stick with us. William Stickevers with us. We are going to take your calls. If you have a question about financial astrology, just